Huples cat. In Canada this week we've been inundated with reports about Niagara Falls and the difference between the Americans and the Canadians and all the rest of it. This is not meant to be a destructive anti-American video at all, but I find it absolutely fascinating. Canada and America, and I'm British in origin, are actually very similar. The people are very, very similar. There's a few minor cultural differences, but overall they're very similar. So what's going on? In Canada, COVID-19 came in hard, it came into the States hard, and then we diverged. We had different paths. It wasn't because we weren't meeting and going outside because of the snow. We've had one of the hottest summers ever on record, and it's only July. And that's another issue, but we won't get into climate change because I really don't want to press everybody's triggers. But this is not an attack on America, it's not an attack on President Trump. I just want to talk about what the fundamental differences are between our two countries' actual populations' response to COVID-19. And it's very dramatic footage indeed.
There's no quick recovery for the global tourism sector, so deeply devastated by this pandemic. Canada's landmark Niagara Falls is no exception. CTV's John Benavalli-Rao found a stark contrast on how both sides of the falls are navigating the same misty waters.
Some see it as a reason to toot our own horn, pointing to what's happening at the falls, a tale of two countries and two very different approaches to COVID-19.
I think it's all about making money for the Americans, so they're more relaxed about controls.
Images of Canadian tour boats with plenty of space on board are being juxtaposed with this scene, a packed American Maid of the Mist.
If you look at the boat on the other side, there's a lot of people.
Since the start of July, the operators of the Canadian hornblower vessels have only been allowed a half-dozen passengers. They can usually carry up to 700.
It's ridiculous, actually. I mean, it's not about safety. We are beyond safe.
Their American counterparts are running trips at half their normal load with 200 guests. On both sides, masks are a must. When the boats pass each other, some have felt it captures the wider difference between how the two countries are faring with COVID. The U.S. with more than 3.8 million cases versus Canada's 111,000. Still, it hasn't been easy for the Canadian operator. They're losing money, and with so few passengers allowed, they've rebranded it as a VIP experience, adding a meal and charging $70, more than double the usual price.
It was kind of great. It was a great view, too.
This family from Quebec, though, says they'd rather the boat be fuller with a cheaper ticket.
I would have opted for more people in.
Things will change here on Friday as Niagara moves into Stage 3, which will allow up to 100 passengers per voyage from the Canadian side. Still, that's just 15% of their usual capacity. The company believes they could operate safely with double that.
I think it could have been handled a bit differently, but nevertheless, we support the province in keeping us safe.
Financially underwater, but hoping for better days.
The recognition that there was a pandemic going on was roughly equal about the same time. America initially moved to reduce people coming into the States before Canada did, and Canada kept the border open quite a long time, both to the United States, long after New York was having real problems, and that caused outbreaks in Toronto and in Montreal. But we didn't really close down our airspace until after America, so in theory we should have had more outbreaks and more cases for population. I am aware Canada's population is about a tenth of the United States. So Canada has not done a great job handling COVID-19. It's done an okay job. So is it up to the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the President, Donald Trump? Are they fully and totally responsible for the diverging paths between the two countries? Not really. I'll get into why not. The other issue is, what about the health response? You have Fauci versus Dr. Tam. The difference, and I'm going to say this, the difference is that the messaging from Justin Trudeau, the premiers, all of the premiers of all of the provinces and territories, and all of the federal health doctors and all of the provincial health doctors and all of the local doctors has been really, really clear. Right from the beginning, the messaging was, wash your hands, keep your distance, stop unnecessary trips. And that messaging essentially has completely not changed. It's been a very consistent messaging. Very late on, far too late on, we're now doing universal masking in most, if not all, buildings, certainly all public buildings, And that was a great thing, because that actually, by the time we brought the masking in, our cases had plummeted. So why are we masking? The people realize, because of the consistent messaging, that the disease is within the community at a very low level. But if you lose vigilance, if we do not stand on guard for thee, it will come roaring back, and then we'll be having an American experience. So very much our great response in June and July in Canada is thanks to having America's example. Huge outbreaks, lots of death, total chaos in response. Very variable messaging from all levels of government in the United States, not just the president. He's been very consistent until recently, where he's decided that masking is a good idea. So it's easy to blame Donald Trump. It's easy to blame Dr. Fauci. But I actually am blaming the inconsistent messaging that's gone out from every layer of government. And it's an absolute farce, and it's an atrocity. Remember, human beings have been through this before. In 1918 to 1920, 1919 specifically, we had Spanish influenza in North America and around the globe. It killed a huge number of people. I believe we estimate 660,000 Americans died. Right now, today, about 150,000 Americans have died, but if you actually look at baseline death data, and that's how we estimate the Spanish flu deaths, it's actually higher than that. Like, it's higher. The number of people who've died unusually higher than normal. You know, compare June, you compare May, you compare them to the last 5 years, death rates around the globe are higher, and so in Canada. Canada is also somewhat, in my opinion, underreporting the death rates from COVID-19. So why did the Canadian population take it seriously, as opposed to a minority of Americans who appear not to even accept it's real until very late on in the day? The reason isn't that Canadians are superior to Americans in intellect. It isn't that Canadians are calmer than and more prone to be told what to do by their socialist governments than Americans. Though you're going to hear both of those extreme views promoted as real. And it's not real, it's fake. An American and a Canadian are essentially the same being, the same person. They have the similar backgrounds in all ways of life. The major difference with the messaging was so inconsistent, starting in March, and continuing to be inconsistent in July, it's easy, if you're not directly affected by COVID-19, to dismiss it. The other problem was that various people in the American government have been telling the American population for months that if you're young, fit and healthy, it's basically flu, which is utter garbage. It's now estimated 1 to 5% of everybody who catches COVID-19 and goes to hospital will have an overwhelming massive cerebral vascular accident. A stroke. Not just the lung damage, but actually stroke. I believe Uncle Al can explain to you that a stroke is not something you want to have ever happen to you. And it doesn't matter the age group for the vascular complications. So this is one of the issues. If the messaging was off target, if the messaging is inconsistent, continually inconsistent, it's very hard to get the population on board. Canada does have people that do protest and do not accept lockdown. They have, I think, about 100 people at one point turned up in Toronto, which is a city of almost 7 million. Compare that to the size and frequency of anti-lockdown demonstrations in the United States. They really believed that it was an attack on their way of life and their economy. Now that is a fundamental difference, and this might sound anti-American, it's just about ideology. When you make God subservient to money, what happens is you lose interest in helping poor people and the disabled and the elderly. You're more interested in not going bankrupt, you're more interested in making money. In Canada, we have phased response in Ontario. We've gone to phase 3. The Niagara Falls boat is actually going to have 100 people on it, not the usual 700. And I can guarantee they won't all be allowed to just go to the top and crowd at the front. They won't. Whereas the American boat has half, 200 versus 400, and there's no self-policing on the top of that boat. They're all jockeying to get their positioning. And it's incredible to me that people have failed to get consistent messaging out at all levels of government in the United States on what was a very simple message. But the other thing that's really annoying is a lot of preppers have failed to give a consistent message to their viewers on COVID-19 and how to sanely and sensibly prep towards it. Not going to get into the beard thing again, but it's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. The bottom line here is when you look at it, Canada is doing great now in July, the end of July, and America is doing really, really badly. It's doing badly in terms of mortality per million, it's doing badly in terms of number of tests, it's doing badly in terms of number of people infected per million, and of course, as everybody knows, though people keep trying to dismiss, America's effective death rate is world beating, and that's not something America likes to do. I'm sure you don't want to be the world's worst at dealing with deaths from COVID-19. Certainly that's not a great thing to do. Now, how can this be reversed? Consistent messaging. The president needs to talk to all the governors and tell them straight: social distance, shut down when necessary, support the poor, support the small businesses, and to make sure that the governors then reach out to all the mayors and tell them straight. It won't be tolerated if you give out a message that's going to kill Americans. If you keep telling people, whether you're the president, a governor, or a mayor, that you don't need to wear a mask in public, you need to be disciplined, you're committing an act of murder against the American people. You are committing treason against the general welfare of Americans, as stated by the Constitution. Now, I know a lot of people are going to start arguing, going off in tangents, saying blah, 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 blah. It is simple murder. If you have no mask and you are close to other people who you don't live with in an airborne droplet pandemic, if you're infected and asymptomatic, remember, asymptomatic can be up to a week or more where you've got no symptoms at all, but you're actually shedding virus, you are killing people. Either the people you infect or the people they infect or the people they infect. You are causing massive economic damage to the United States of America. It was shown in Spanish influenza, and I'm fairly sure it's pretty much going to be shown in this one, that when you don't lock down early, and when you don't keep locked down, and when you open up early, the economic damage is worse than the lockdown. It was clearly shown in 1918, and I can guarantee it's going to be clearly shown in 2020. The countries that iron hit lockdown, bang, shut down and supported their workers and small businesses, that's key, otherwise you're not going to get compliance, actually are going to re-emerge once we have a vaccine in a much stronger position than everybody else who hasn't done proper lockdowns. And Canada locked down late. If we'd locked down a week or two earlier, or a week earlier, we would have probably have half the death rates we have now. If we'd have treated and done with our old people's homes a little better than what we did, we would have had a lot less death rate. We're not perfect in Canada. Close to it, but not perfect. So it's not a criticism of Donald Trump. He's getting advice from multiple sources. But it shows that in an SHTF, the person in charge calling the shots really has to have a very clear and a very accurate and a very real vision of what to do. Going off in side tangents about bleach and ultraviolet light, going on about we would have no problems if it wasn't for China, is a side travel that causes confusion in the community. It's the same with the bioweapon thing. If this was a bioweapon, which it absolutely is not, absolutely this is not a human altered virus, it's a natural occurring virus, clear. There is no scientific evidence whatsoever, apart from very bad sites, that it is manipulated. But even if it was manipulated, the effects are the same. What you're going to do as a person, as a prepper, as a business are the same. Now the other thing is, they interviewed some of the Canadians on the Canadian side about the Maid of the Mist and versus the Hornblower. And it's interesting what they say.
Well, it's way too crowded. Yeah, actually, we took a picture of the boat. It's, I don't know, I don't find that it's very safe to be in a boat like that. Well, it's much better here.
When you look at the difference between the boats, I think that says a lot about Canada versus the States right now and how we're handling the pandemic.
So what they're saying is they're proud that they don't have such a huge death rate on our side, and they blame the Americans for crowding. And that's possibly true. Now the other thing is that you've got to look at is Black Lives Matter and the anti-police racism protests that have been going on all across the planet. There's a difference in how most of the Canadian demonstrations have happened, except for the anti-lockdown demonstrations. You'll notice there's a difference between these Americans who are protesting Black Lives Matter and Canadians who are protesting Black Lives Matter. Did you see what the difference was? Now, generally speaking, that's true. Yes, there are Canadians demonstrating, not wearing masks, not doing social distancing. But generally, the vast majority of the population is doing social distancing, masking, and washing hands, and not going out if they're sick. It's quite easy to get supplementary income in Canada if you're laid off from work or if you're sick. We have a large number of our people who've self-diagnosed themselves as at risk and at home, and the government's giving them money. The money tree. The money tree exists because in a situation of a calamity like a pandemic or a world war or a hurricane, the government can borrow trillions of dollars and pay it off over hundreds of years to support the economy, so when the issue is resolved, people haven't starved to death, people haven't become homeless, people haven't rioted, people haven't had to turn to crime. People are ready to resume work. And do some people take advantage of that in Canada? Yeah, absolutely. I know people, I know 3 people who've got more money now because of this program, and that's the price we pay. That's the price we pay to make sure everybody needs it gets it. If you try and police social assistance in a crisis, you hurt people. The more people you hurt, the more crime, the more civil disturbance you will see on your streets, and specifically, the more you will have a hard time recovering from the issue. Now, there's some things you want to know about COVID-19 when you're looking at data. Case rate per million, testing rate per million. That makes it equal. Canada's smaller than America. America's a huge country, but if Canada's death rate, if Canada's infection rate per million Canadians compared to per million Americans is significantly lower, America needs to do at least what Canada's doing. And vice versa. If we want to have a really high death rate, we should do what America's doing. You can't just click your heels together and hope COVID-19 goes away. It's not going to go away. It might be around for a long time. We're all hoping for a vaccine at the end of the year. I have serious doubts about that. Coronavirus and COVID-19 disease comes from SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus, a novel one, a new one, is actually really hard to vaccinate against. It's a very smart little virus. It can get in and out and all the rest of it. Yes, there's some medications being used, and that's great. And we're studying and researching all across the world at any given time. My own hospital has, I think, about 25 different treatments and medications that we are studying scientifically, double-blind. We don't know if we're giving them or not, and then we get enough people together and we see if it actually made an effect. So hydroxy is a classic example. In Canada, very early on, Ontario bought massive amounts of it. As soon as the first report came out of France, which turned out not to be true, that it was a miracle preventative and cure for COVID-19, Canada bought millions of units of it, almost immediately. And the reason we did that was because, wait, it might work, but 2, other people need that medication, and it's being hyped so much, there's going to be a worldwide shortage, and that's in fact what happened. What happened in the States is obviously Donald Trump was briefed either by people in his government or by watching Fox TV, and he felt that it was a miracle. He was convinced by the French argument, the French doctor, the only doctor who argued for it. And he kept saying, we're going to be fine, there's no need to give money to the poor, don't worry about being laid off, we'll all be back to work in the very near future, this is just going to disappear, and all you have to do is take this and you'll be fine. I'm taking it and I'm fine. You can't rely on hope when you're running a country. You can't rely on hope when you're actually a prepper. Yes, it may have been right, it may have worked, it may have been the miracle cure, but the President of the United States needed to do what Canada did. Don't push and promote hope, store it up in case it works, but don't go around telling people this is no big deal because you can take hydroxy. That was the major messaging error that started to occur quite early on in the United States. And to this day, I can guarantee there's people watching this video that are going to put a whole bunch of links below in their comments to why hydroxy is a miracle drug. It isn't. You've been duped and you've been fooled. So the other issue here is what happens with the messaging. So Canada's really flattened the curve. We've been flat for like 3 weeks now in Toronto, which is one of the hot spots. I think we have like 3 patients in the whole of the hospital program in the Greater Toronto area right now. And we're still in phase 2. We're going to go to phase 3 quite shortly. Any resumption in cases above maybe 10, we're going to shut right down to phase 2 or phase 1 again, without hesitation. Our mayor's on board with this, our premier's on board with this, and our prime minister's on board with this. It's simple, direct, clear messaging. The vast majority of the population are on board with this. Even with cases minimal for 3 weeks, people are taking extreme precautions, generally speaking. People cross into the road when people are passing on the sidewalk. People pull into other people's driveways with their dogs to let you walk by. People are being very conscious of the fact that herd immunity cannot happen, but if people don't get into contact range, herd immunity happens. There's no immunity, but there's no transmission. It's the transmission that Canada's done well in beating. And although I can praise my leaders to the nth degree, it's the people behind them, it's the people informing them from a science background that actually should be taking the credit. There's no question that when you see Dr. Tam on TV, she's incredibly boring, right? And a lot of people hate her on the right, but the vast majority of Canadians see her and see her for what she is, which is a highly respected and very educated doctor, okay? She's not there for the New World Order or anything else. She's doing her best. She's made some errors, whatever. But the messaging is clear. Stay at home. The messaging in phase 3 is stay at home. If you go out, do so responsibly. It's not stay at home has ended. Stay at home is still here for the perceivable future. Canadians know that they need to keep vigilant for this, probably for months. Nobody's fooling themselves here. So the border got shut between Canada and America, and I know a lot of people in the northern states of America are suffering huge financial losses because of this. Now it's up to your government to help you out. Canada's not going to open the border to help you out economically. We care about economics, but we care more about death rates in Canada. That's the difference, the fundamental difference. Our very right-wing, not very pleasant right-wing ideology Premier Doug Ford, he's totally on board with that. He doesn't care how much waste of money he does. He doesn't care how much socialism he has to do. His priority is to stop Canadians dying, stop Ontarians dying. That's it. And get us open as soon as we can safely. It's not being dictated by economics, it's being dictated by safety. And I'm sure the people behind this are actually have the evidence which I've seen and presented in the past that it actually is the best economic response. Harsh, fast shutdowns, strong, simple messaging actually allows your area to have less death, over a longer period though, but less death, and then you can reopen stronger and have a stronger economy at the end of it. So what do you guys and girls think? Do you think Americans and Canadians are different people? I really don't. I'm British, so I'm sort of biased and I can look at both sides. I do think there's fundamental differences. For example, Americans are going to say freedom, freedom, freedom. Freedom from ill health, freedom from death is actually the single most fundamental important freedom anybody has. Make no mistake, absolutely no mistake. But if it's a choice between X or Y, and X means I'm dead, I'm always probably going to plump for Y, as long as I'm not hurting other people. Now you might not agree with that, you might think it's freedom, it's your body, your right not to wear a mask in public. I'm not understanding where that's coming from. First of all, you're dumber than a brick, because you're likely to catch a disease that can kill 1 in 100 people that catch it, and cause pretty severe issues for about 5 to 10 people out of 100 who catch it, and kills all age groups, mostly the elderly. 12 older people who are sick die for every 1 young healthy person. I don't like those odds. You can argue that, but I would argue that the reverse is true. Your freedom is only inherent amongst living in a society that functions, and by going out of your way to infect yourself or spread an infection to your fellow citizens, you are very seriously impinging on their freedom, very seriously. And that messaging has got out there and has become like a virus itself. A lot of people are focusing on things other than how to avoid catching COVID-19 disease and how to avoid not passing it along. They're focusing on anything else other than that. It's the same argument with beards. Like, I'm blah blah blah, but you can't fit an N95 if you have a beard. That's pretty obvious. So why are you wearing a beard? I don't know. You don't want to have an N95 work if you need one, I guess. It doesn't make logical sense. Yes, the economy has took a pounding in the States. It's taking a pounding in Canada. But you know, we have yoga studios that are allowed to open in phase 3 that aren't opening. You know why they're not opening? Because they believe the government is a little biased towards helping the economy. They're waiting to see what happens to the other yoga studios who are opening when the government said they can. They don't want to infect and kill their clients. They don't want to infect and kill their workers. I think that's a major difference. There's been numerous businesses have tried to stay open in the States. There's been 3 or 4 in Canada. They've been shut down and shut down hard. Yes, we have youth wandering around doing all sorts of stuff up here as well. But generally speaking, the people are listening to the messaging. The messaging is consistent across media. The messaging's been consistent from all levels of government. That's the difference. I really would like to know if anybody else has got any other ideas about this. Why is America such a basket case with this infection and Canada's doing reasonably well? That's not to say this is going to continue doing reasonably well in the next week or the next month or the next year. I'm not at all convinced that Canada's not going to experience a massive uprising of infection cases as soon as people drop their guard. But I'm really surprised and very happy to see that almost everybody I know isn't dropping their guard. They're not going out to restaurants though they can, they're not going to patios though they can, they're not booking foreign holidays though they could try. And that's another issue altogether, isn't it? Booking foreign holidays. Did you know 10,000 Americans have tried to get into Canada since this began to visit on holiday, to have a holiday? I mean, you've really got to be pretty thick to think that you can go to a foreign country in the middle of a pandemic and go on as a tourist. It's crazy. And yet other parts of the world are encouraging people to do tourism because their tourist sector's hurting. Government should be bailing that sector out for as long as it takes. Lest we all forget, in World War II, for 6 years, 3 in America, our governments had nothing other than war economies. It was all debt-based. They weren't producing and selling and trading anything. Well, the Americans were. But everybody else was piling up debt. And it caused severe problems for 10 to 20 to 30 years in England's case. But it can be done. And if the freedom of your population from death is the goal, it must be done. Remember, in SHTF, if you don't prepare, tomorrow will always be worse than today. And during an SHTF, if you don't do the straight and the right and the easy thing, it will be worse tomorrow. Toodles!
This is a 2020 Lovely Cat production.